I'm Jessica Miller, 32 years old and CEO of my own tech company. When my dad invited me to his 60th birthday celebration, I thought it might finally be our chance to reconnect. Instead, I found myself being directed to the service entrance by my stepmother while the real guests used the front door. The humiliation burned through me like acid until a surprise visitor changed everything with two simple words: Madam CEO. Before I tell you how my own family tried to hide me away at my dad's celebration, let me know where you're watching from and hit that like and subscribe button. Trust me, you'll want to see how this story ends. To understand what happened at that birthday party, you need to know a bit about my family. Growing up, Dad and I were inseparable. Robert Miller was a hardworking electrician who taught me everything from how to throw a baseball to how to fix a circuit breaker. Every Sunday was our special day together. Pancakes for breakfast, then some kind of adventure, even if it was just fishing at the local pond or visiting a museum with free admission. Everything changed when Mom left us. I was 14, coming home from school to find her suitcases by the door. She said she needed to find herself and couldn't do it while being a wife and mother. Dad and I were devastated, but we clung to each other, becoming even closer through the pain. That lasted exactly 2 years until Caroline entered our lives. Dad met her when he was doing electrical work at her expansive colonial home in the wealthy part of town. Caroline Westington was everything my mother wasn't: polished, sophisticated, and from what Dad called old money. She took an interest in my father that seemed flattering at first. I was 16 and initially thought it might be good for him to find happiness again. What I didn't realize was that Caroline saw my father as a project, a diamond in the rough she could polish and bring into her world. She found his working-class charm refreshing and his skills authentic. Within 6 months, they were married, and Dad and I moved into her mansion with her 2 children from a previous marriage. Brendan and Madison were 17 and 15 at the time, and they made it clear from day one that we weren't welcome in their world. Brendan would accidentally bump into me in hallways, while Madison would examine my discount store clothes with barely disguised contempt. "Did you get that at a garage sale?" became her standard greeting. Caroline was more subtle but equally clear about the new hierarchy. She encouraged Dad to quit his electrical business and join her family's investment firm, despite his lack of experience. "Robert, darling, you have natural business acumen. You just need the right opportunity," she would say, while simultaneously suggesting I might want to dress more appropriately when her friends came over. While Dad was being remade in Caroline's image, I threw myself into school. I worked weekends at a local computer repair shop and evenings waiting tables to save for college. My grades earned me a partial scholarship to State University, but not enough to cover everything. I remember the night I asked Dad if he could help with tuition. "Jessica, honey, we're trying to put 3 kids through college. Brendan's going to Princeton, and Madison's set on Yale. Why don't you consider community college first? Caroline says it's much more economical." I moved into a tiny apartment with 3 roommates and worked 30 hours a week while carrying a full course load in computer science. Dad called occasionally, but our conversations grew shorter and more superficial. He was busy with charity galas and country club memberships, while I was counting pennies for ramen noodles. During my junior year, I developed a scheduling app with 2 classmates. We worked nights in my apartment, coding until sunrise, fueled by cheap coffee and big dreams. By graduation, our little startup had secured seed funding. I skipped the ceremony to pitch to investors. Over the next 8 years, I poured everything into growing WinSchedule, from a simple app to an enterprise software solution used by Fortune 500 companies. Last year, we reached unicorn status with a $1 billion valuation. My face appeared in business magazines, and industry leaders started mentioning my name in conversations about innovation. Through all of this, my relationship with Dad remained distant. I'd see him at major holidays, usually at Caroline's perfectly choreographed gatherings where I felt like an intruder. Our one-on-one time had disappeared completely. Caroline was always there, steering conversations away from my business achievements and toward Brendan's minor successes at her family's firm, or Madison's social connections through her art gallery job that her mother's friends funded. When Dad called about his 60th birthday celebration, I was surprised. "Caroline and I would love for you to come," he said, sounding genuinely excited. "It's going to be at the Oakmont Country Club, very exclusive." I decided this might be our chance to reconnect. I cleared my calendar, bought a designer dress I couldn't really afford back when I was starting out, and selected a vintage watch as his gift, the kind he used to admire in store windows during our Sunday walks. "This will be great," I told myself as I wrapped his present. "Dad will see how far I've come, and maybe he'll remember the connection we used to have." I had no idea just how wrong I would be. The morning of Dad's birthday, I spent extra time getting ready. My new Armani dress was simple but elegant, navy blue with a subtle shimmer that caught the light when I moved. I paired it with pearl earrings that had belonged to my grandmother, and heels that cost more than my first month's rent in college. Looking in the mirror, I barely recognized myself compared to the scrappy startup founder who once pitched investors in thrift store blazers. I practiced what I'd say to Dad, rehearsing stories about the company's growth that I thought might make him proud. The vintage Omega watch was wrapped in silver paper with a handwritten card explaining that it reminded me of our Sunday walks. The Oakmont Country Club was as imposing as its reputation suggested. Sprawling green lawns surrounded a stone mansion that dated back to the 1920s. Luxury cars lined the circular driveway as attendants in crisp uniforms directed traffic. I handed my keys to a young valet who smiled warmly. "Beautiful evening for a celebration, ma'am," he said, giving me a claim ticket. "Yes, it is," I replied, feeling a flutter of optimism at the simple kindness. I followed the path of lanterns, toward the main entrance, where a doorman greeted arriving guests. The nervous excitement I'd been feeling shifted to genuine hope. Maybe tonight would be different. Maybe Dad would introduce me proudly to his friends. Maybe Caroline would finally acknowledge my accomplishments. Just as I reached the steps to the main entrance, I heard her voice. "Jessica, there you are!" Caroline appeared, wearing a champagne-colored gown that probably cost more than some people's cars. Her blonde hair was perfectly styled, her smile practiced and cold. "I was wondering when you'd arrive," she said, air-kissing near my cheek, without making contact. "I'm right on time," I said, checking my watch. 7 o'clock, as the invitation stated. "Yes, well." She glanced around as another couple approached the entrance. "The guests are arriving through the front. Family is using the back entrance." I blinked, certain I'd misheard her. "I'm sorry?" "The back entrance, dear." Her voice dropped to a whisper. "By the kitchen. It's actually more convenient for family. Shorter walk to the ballroom." The couple behind us was getting closer. Caroline's smile remained fixed as she placed a firm hand on my elbow, steering me away from the entrance. "Just go around that hedge and follow the service path. Robert is already inside greeting guests. I need to get back to them. See you inside." Before I could protest, she turned and glided back up the steps, warmly greeting the approaching couple as if they were long-lost friends. I stood frozen, clutching my gift bag, as realization dawned. I wasn't being directed to a special family entrance. I was being hidden, separated from the real guests Caroline wanted to impress. The back entrance meant the service entrance, where caterers and staff entered the building. The humiliation hit me like a physical blow. For a moment, I considered leaving, driving away with my dignity intact. But that would mean giving up on seeing Dad, giving up on any chance of reconnection. With lead in my stomach, I walked around the manicured hedge, finding the narrow concrete path that led toward the back of the building. As I walked, memories flooded back. Caroline forgetting to set a place for me at Thanksgiving. Madison announcing her gallery showing to the family while interrupting my attempt to share news about securing major funding. Brendan loudly discussing Princeton connections while Dad nodded appreciatively, never asking about my business achievements. The service entrance was exactly what I expected, a utilitarian door with delivery trucks parked nearby. Kitchen staff in white uniforms moved, quickly carrying trays and equipment. A few glanced at me curiously as I approached, clearly wondering why someone in an Armani dress was using their entrance. "Excuse me," I said to a young woman carrying a stack of napkins. "I'm here for the Miller birthday celebration." She looked confused but pointed down a hallway. "Ballroom's that way, through the double doors and to your left." I thanked her and made my way through the kitchen's humid heat, dodging busy staff preparing appetizers and arranging dessert platters. The contrast between my path and the one the real guests were taking couldn't have been more stark. When I finally entered the ballroom from a side door, I saw the celebration in full swing. Crystal chandeliers hung from high ceilings, tables were decorated with elaborate floral arrangements, and a string quartet played in the corner. Servers circulated with champagne and hors d'oeuvres. Caroline stood near the main entrance beside my father, greeting guests as they arrived through the proper front door. Dad looked handsome in a new tuxedo, laughing at something a well-dressed man had said. He hadn't seen me yet. A server approached with a clipboard. "Name, please?" "Jessica Miller. I'm Robert's daughter." He checked his list and nodded. "You're at table 12, Ms. Miller." I glanced around at the table numbers. The main family table at the front of the room was clearly marked as table 1, where Carolyn's parents were already seated alongside Brendan and Madison. Table 12 was near the back, beside the service doors. "There must be a mistake," I said. "I'm the daughter of the guest of honor." The server looked uncomfortable. "I'm sorry, ma'am. The seating chart was approved by Mrs. Miller. Table 12 is your assigned seat." I nodded numbly and made my way to the back table, where I found myself seated with my father's second cousin from Minnesota, whom he hadn't seen in 20 years, and several distant acquaintances who seemed equally confused about their placement. From my position at table 12, I had a perfect view of the entire ballroom without being easily noticed. It was like watching a play where I had somehow been cast as both audience member and forgotten extra. The seat directly across from me remained empty, making the table feel even more obviously incomplete. Caroline moved through the room like a queen holding court, touching arms and laughing at jokes, making sure everyone had champagne and felt appropriately special. She had organized everything to perfection. Ice sculptures shaped like the number 60, photographs of Dad's life displayed on elegant easels, most from the last 10 years, few featuring me, and personalized menus detailing the 5-course meal ahead. Dad followed in her wake, seeming simultaneously proud and slightly overwhelmed. He had gained weight since I'd seen him last Christmas, his tuxedo slightly tight around the middle. The transformation from the lean, strong electrician who once climbed ladders and crawled through attics was complete. Now he was just another wealthy man at a country club, indistinguishable from Caroline's circle. Brendan and Madison circulated, among guests their own age, a privileged group in designer clothes who laughed too loudly and seemed to find everything amusing. Brendan had Dad's height, but none of his former humility, slapping backs and making expansive gestures as he told stories. Madison flitted between groups, her blonde hair identical to her mother's, her scrutiny of other women's outfits barely disguised as compliments. I sat quietly, declining champagne from passing servers, waiting for an opportunity to approach Dad. Twice I stood and started toward him, only to have someone intercept him just before I arrived. The third time, Caroline smoothly inserted herself between us, linking her arm through his and steering him toward the Johnsons, who simply must hear about our Aspen trip. The gift bag with the vintage watch sat untouched on my lap. I wondered if I'd even get a chance to give it to him. "Jessica Miller? Is that you?" I turned to find an older man with a familiar face, but whose name escaped me. "It's Jim Lawson. Your dad and I worked construction together before you were born. I was at your 5th birthday party. Brought you that toy toolbox, remember? The memory clicked into place. Uncle Jim, of course I remember. You taught me how to use a level. He laughed, pulling out the empty chair across from me. Mind if I join you? I'm supposed to be at table 9, but honestly, those finance types your stepmom seated me with are putting me to sleep. For the first time that evening, I smiled genuinely. Please do. Jim hadn't changed much, still barrel-chested with calloused, hands that spoke of actual work. So, he said after sitting, the famous Jessica Miller. I read about your company in the business section. Scheduling software, right? Doing pretty well from what I hear. I nodded, surprised and touched that. He knew. We're growing faster than expected. Just opened offices in Singapore and London. Robert must be bursting with pride. The comment stung more than it should have. I'm not sure he knows much about it, to be honest. Jim frowned, looking toward where my father stood surrounded by Caroline's friends. That doesn't sound like the Robert I knew. He used to carry your kindergarten art projects in his lunchbox to show the guys. Before I could respond, Brendan's voice carried across the nearby tables. He was speaking to a circle of young men in similar expensive suits, gesturing with his champagne flute. Tech startups are basically a lottery, he was saying authoritatively. Some kid codes in their basement, gets lucky with timing, and suddenly, they're worth millions. Not like actually building something substantial over generations. He hadn't seen me, wasn't speaking about me specifically, but the dismissal of everything I'd worked for hit hard. 8 years of 18-hour days, missed holidays, learning business skills on the fly, managing growing teams across time zones, reduced to getting lucky. Sounds like someone's jealous, Jim commented quietly, noticing my expression. I forced a smile. It's fine. Not everyone understands the industry. Still, family should support family. Jim looked around the room critically. Speaking of which, why are you stuck back here by the kitchen? The question brought back the humiliation of the service entrance. Apparently, this is where I belong. Jim's eyes narrowed as understanding dawned. That's not right, Jessica. For a moment, I considered leaving. The watch could be mailed. Dad clearly wasn't missing me. But something kept me in my seat. Perhaps the stubborn determination that had built my company from nothing, or maybe just the fundamental human desire to be acknowledged by a parent. As dinner approached, servers began bringing out the first course, some kind of artfully arranged seafood appetizer. One young server placed my plate down with particular care. Ms. Miller, he said quietly, I just wanted to say I use your scheduling app for my classes. It's really helped me balance work and school. The simple recognition from a stranger was both heartwarming and painful in contrast to my family's indifference. Thank you. That means a lot. As he moved on, I noticed several staff members glancing my way with what seemed like more respect than my own family had shown. It was a strange feeling, being more valued by the service staff than by the people at the main table. The room quieted as Caroline tapped her glass, announcing that dinner would begin, followed by a program of speeches celebrating our beloved Robert. The tension in my shoulders increased as I wondered what role, if any, I would play in this carefully orchestrated tribute. The dinner itself was exactly what you'd expect from an exclusive country club. Tiny portions of expensive food arranged like abstract art on oversized plates. French terms dotted the menu for dishes that could have been described more simply, in English. Wine pairings accompanied each course, with sommeliers providing elaborate descriptions of regions and vintages. From my position at table 12, I could see the head table clearly. Caroline sat beside Dad, occasionally touching his arm or leaning in to whisper something that made him smile. Brendan and Madison flanked them, along with Caroline's parents, and what appeared to be her brother and his wife. They looked like a perfect family portrait, complete and content without me. Uncle Jim provided welcome company, sharing stories about Dad from their younger days that reminded me of the man I used to know. Your father once worked 3 days straight to rewire an elderly widow's house for free when her system failed. In winter, he told me between courses. That's the Robert Miller I remember. I nodded, trying to reconcile that image with the man laughing at table 1, who hadn't yet acknowledged my presence. As dessert was being served, some deconstructed version of tiramisu that barely resembled the original, Caroline stood and tapped her glass again. The room fell silent. Thank you all for coming to celebrate my wonderful husband's 60th birthday, she began, her voice carrying perfectly without a microphone. Robert has blessed our lives in countless ways, and tonight we want to honor him with words from those who love him most. She gestured to an easel I hadn't noticed before, which held a program listing the evening's speakers. From my distance, I couldn't read the names, but I straightened in my chair, wondering if I'd be called upon. First, I'd like to invite Robert's father-in-law, William Westington, to say a few words. Caroline's father stood to polite applause, launching into a speech about how Robert had truly become a member of the Westington family and embraced our values and traditions. He spoke about golf games and business connections, mentioning how quickly Robert had adapted to our world. Not once did he mention Dad's previous life, his work as an electrician, or his accomplishments before Caroline. Next came Caroline's brother, then a parade of country club friends and business associates, each telling stories about Robert that could have been about almost anyone. Generic golf anecdotes, charity gala memories, appreciation for his generous spirit, and commitment to the community. I kept waiting for my name to be called, for some acknowledgement that Dad had a life and family before the Westingtons. But as speaker after speaker rose and sat, it became increasingly clear that I had been written out of the narrative completely. When Caroline announced that our children would now speak about their father, my last hope flickered briefly. But it was immediately extinguished as Brendan stood, adjusting his tie. When Mom first introduced us to Robert, he began, Madison and I weren't sure what to expect, but he quickly became the father we never had. I stopped listening, a rushing sound filling my ears. They were erasing me, erasing our history together, the years when it was just Dad and me against the world. My fingers gripped the edge of the table until my knuckles turned white. Madison followed with an equally revisionist speech, talking about family ski trips and Dad teaching me to drive. Experiences I knew for a fact had never happened, as Dad had been terrified of Madison's driving and had hired an instructor. Throughout these speeches, I kept watching Dad's face, waiting for some sign of discomfort or recognition of the falsehoods. But he smiled and nodded, occasionally wiping away what appeared to be tears of happiness. Had he truly forgotten? Or had he simply chosen to accept this new version of history? As Madison concluded to enthusiastic applause, Caroline returned to center stage. And now, to conclude our program before Robert shares his own thoughts, I would like to say a few words about my incredible husband. No mention of me. No acknowledgement that Dad's only biological child was even in the room. I had been erased not just from the present celebration, but from his life story entirely. Beside me, Jim muttered, "This is complete bull." A woman at a nearby table, one of Caroline's friends I vaguely recognized from holiday gatherings, leaned closer to her companion and whispered just loudly enough for me to hear, "I heard the daughter from his first marriage is in tech or something. Nouveau riche." Caroline was kind to even invite her. The French phrase for new money stung like a slap. I sat perfectly still, the untouched dessert melting on my plate, the gift bag heavy on my lap. Across the room, Dad caught my eye briefly, then looked away, his attention recaptured by Caroline's speech about their perfect partnership. In that moment, I felt like the ghost at the feast, visible but not quite real, present but not acknowledged. The little girl who once shared Sunday pancakes with her father might as well have never existed. Caroline was midway through describing their magical anniversary trip to Tuscany when the ballroom doors opened with a decisive bang that cut through her carefully modulated speech. Every head turned toward the sound. A woman in her early 60s stood framed in the doorway, her silver hair cut in a sharp bob that matched her no-nonsense expression. She wore a simple black pantsuit that somehow looked more expensive than all the designer gowns in the room combined. Two younger assistants flanked her, both looking slightly frazzled as if they'd been trying to keep up with her. I recognized her immediately, and my heart jumped into my throat. Diane Fletcher, founder of Fletcher Innovations and one of the most powerful venture capitalists in the country. My company had pitched to her firm last month for our Series C funding round. The room fell into confused silence as Diane scanned, the crowd with laser-focused intensity. Caroline recovered first, smoothing her dress and approaching with an extended hand. "I don't believe we've had the pleasure. I'm Caroline Miller, the hostess." Diane brushed past her without acknowledgement, still scanning the tables. When her eyes landed on me in the back corner, her face broke into a genuine smile. "There you are," she called out, her voice cutting through the murmurs. "Madam CEO herself." Every head in the room swiveled toward me. I felt heat rising to my face as Diane strode purposefully between the tables, ignoring the stares. "I'm so sorry I'm late," she continued, reaching my table and extending her hand. "Traffic was abysmal, and then your assistant had to direct me here. I almost didn't believe her when she said where you'd be seated." I stood and shook her hand, finding my voice. "Ms. Fletcher, I wasn't expecting you." "Diane, please. And I told your Tanya I'd stop by. The paperwork for the investment is finalized, but I wanted to congratulate you in person." She looked around at table 12 with its empty chairs and half-eaten desserts. "Though I must say I'm confused. Why is the most successful entrepreneur in the city sitting in the back by the kitchen?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. I could feel every eye in the room on us, could practically hear the whispers starting. At the head table, Caroline had gone very still, while Dad looked genuinely confused. "It's my father's birthday," I explained quietly. "I'm just here as family." Diane raised an eyebrow. "Family? Then why aren't you at the main table?" Without waiting for an answer, she turned to address the room. "For those who don't know me, I'm Diane Fletcher. I've just finalized a $20 million investment in WinSchedule, the company this brilliant young woman founded and has grown to international success." The silence in the room deepened. I could see Brendan's jaw literally drop. "In fact," Diane continued, seemingly oblivious to the tension she was creating, "Jessica's company was just named one of the top 10 tech firms to watch by Global Business Monthly. The youngest CEO ever to make that list, if I'm not mistaken." She turned back to me with a conspiratorial smile. "I crashed a birthday party just to tell you that the committee has selected you for the Fletcher Innovation Award this year. First woman under 40 to receive it." I stood there, torn between mortification at the scene unfolding and a small vindictive pleasure at the shock on Caroline's face. Dad had risen halfway from his chair, his expression unreadable from this distance. Caroline quickly recovered, gliding over with practiced grace. "Ms. Fletcher, what a pleasure to have you join us. Jessica didn't mention she was expecting such a distinguished guest." "I wasn't expected," Diane replied coolly. "Just couldn't pass up the chance to congratulate Jessica in person. $20 million is our largest single investment this quarter." Caroline's smile remained fixed, but her eyes had turned calculating. "How wonderful. We're all so proud of Jessica's little company." "Little?" Diane laughed. WinSchedule employs over 200 people across 3 continents and is valued at just under $1 billion. There's nothing little about it." I watched as this information rippled through the room. Guests who had barely glanced at me all evening were now staring openly. Madison whispered urgently to her brother, whose face had turned an interesting shade of red. At the main table, Dad was still half standing, looking lost between worlds. "Well," Caroline said, her voice slightly higher than normal, "we had no idea Jessica's work was so significant. She's always been so modest about her achievements." Diane gave her a look that could have frozen fire. Modest, or simply never asked? She turned back to me. "I don't mean to disrupt your father's celebration, Jessica, but I did want to personally deliver the news about the award. The ceremony is next month in San Francisco. Black tie. Very prestigious. You should bring your family." Her emphasis on the last word was subtle but unmistakable. As she spoke, guests began whispering to each other, and I could see phones being discreetly checked as people presumably looked up my company and confirmed Diane's claims. The dynamic in the room had shifted palpably, like air pressure changing before a storm. Dad finally made his way over, moving between tables with a slightly dazed expression. "Jessica," he said when he reached us, his voice uncertain. "I had no idea your business was doing so well." The simple statement, with its implicit admission that he hadn't known, hadn't asked, hadn't cared enough to find out, hurt more than all of Caroline's snubs combined. The silence that followed Dad's words seemed to stretch forever. Around us, the birthday party continued in a strangely muted way. Glasses clinked, servers moved between tables, the string quartet played softly in the corner. But all I could focus on was my father's face as he processed what was happening. Diane Fletcher, sensing the tension, patted my shoulder. "I'll leave you to your family celebration, Jessica. My team will be in touch about the award ceremony details." With a last pointed look at Caroline, she strode toward the exit, leaving a wake of whispers behind her. Caroline quickly moved to regain control of the situation. "Well, what an exciting interruption. Now if we could return to our program." "No." The word came out of my mouth before I'd consciously decided to speak. "I don't think we can just return to the program." Caroline's smile remained fixed, but her eyes narrowed slightly. "Jessica, dear, this is your father's birthday celebration. Let's not make it about me," I finished for her. "Trust me, that's not a risk. I've been effectively invisible since I arrived through the service entrance." Dad frowned. "The service entrance? What are you talking about?" I turned to him, suddenly calm in a way that comes only when you have nothing left to lose. When I arrived, Caroline directed me to enter through the back door. "By the kitchen, where the caterers come in." Dad looked at Caroline in confusion. "Why would you do that?" "I thought it would be more convenient," she replied smoothly. "A shorter walk to the ballroom." "No," I said, my voice stronger now. "You didn't want me seen coming in the front door with the real guests. Just like you didn't want me at the family table. Just like you've been keeping me at a distance for 12 years. Memories flooded back as I spoke. A dozen Christmas dinners where my gifts were the only ones under the tree without designer labels. Graduation parties for Brendan and Madison where my academic achievements went unmentioned. Family photos where I was positioned at the edge, easily cropped out. "That's ridiculous," Carolyn said, but her voice lacked conviction. Brendan and Madison had joined us now, forming a semicircle that effectively blocked the view of most guests, creating an illusion of privacy in the crowded room. "Jessica is clearly overreacting," Madison said with a practiced eye roll. "Always so dramatic." "Is that why I wasn't mentioned once in any of the speeches?" I asked quietly. "Is that why no one acknowledged that Dad had a life before all of this?" I gestured around at the opulent ballroom. "Is that why his only biological child was seated by the kitchen?" Dad looked increasingly uncomfortable. "Jessica, I'm sure there was no intention to—" "Stop making excuses for them," I interrupted, surprising myself with my directness. "When was the last time you asked me about my life? My company? When did you stop being the dad who came to science?" Fares and taught me how to change a tire? The question hung between us, heavy with years of accumulated distance. Your company seems to be doing fine without any help, Brendan interjected. Some of us didn't have venture capitalists throwing millions our way. I turned to him, anger finally breaking through my composed exterior. No, you just had your mother's family connections handing you positions you didn't earn. I built my company from nothing, working 80-hour weeks while living on ramen noodles. What exactly did you build, Brendan? Caroline stepped forward, placing herself slightly in front of her son. That's quite enough. You're causing a scene at your father's birthday. Am I? Or am I finally addressing what's been happening for years? I reached into the gift bag I'd been holding all evening and pulled out the vintage watch. I brought this for you, Dad. It's like the ones you used to admire when we walked downtown on Sundays. Remember those days? Before you decided that being Robert Miller, electrician and father, wasn't good enough anymore? Dad took the watch, staring at it as if it were an artifact from another life. In many ways, it was. Jessica, he began, his voice unsteady. I never meant to drift apart. Things just got busy and things didn't get busy, I corrected him. You made choices. Every time you let Caroline seat me at the far end of the table, every time you stayed silent when Brendan and Madison mocked my clothes or my education, every time you failed to mention to your new friends that you have a daughter who loves you, those were choices. I could see the impact of my words in his eyes, the first real recognition I'd seen all evening. Around us, despite Caroline's attempts at damage control, guests were watching with undisguised interest. I don't need your approval, I continued, my voice softening slightly. I don't need your money or your connections or your social standing, but I did need my dad, and you chose to be someone else's father instead. Dad looked stricken, the watch clutched in his hand. For the first time, I saw something crack in his carefully constructed new identity. A glimpse of the man who had once taught me that character mattered more than status. I didn't realize, he said quietly. I thought you were doing fine on your own. You've always been so independent. Independent doesn't mean I stopped needing a father, I replied. Caroline cleared her throat. This is hardly the time or place. For a family therapy session, we have guests. The guests can wait, Dad said, surprising everyone. My daughter is talking to me. The simple acknowledgement, my daughter, after an evening of erasure, felt like the first drop of rain after a drought. But it wasn't enough to wash away years of neglect. I think I've said what I needed to say, I told him, suddenly tired. And Diane was right about one thing. I am receiving the Fletcher Innovation Award next month. It's a big deal in my industry. I paused, looking directly at him. I'd like you to be there, Dad. Just you, so we can talk properly, without all this. I gestured at the opulent surroundings. His face registered surprise, then something like hope. I'd like that, he said quietly. Caroline immediately interjected. We'll check our calendar. The spring charity season is so busy. No, Dad said firmly, surprising us both. I'll be there, Jessica. Just tell me when and where. For a moment, we stood looking at each other across the gulf of years and choices and different worlds. Then, before Caroline could say anything more, I nodded once and turned to leave. Jessica, wait, Dad called after me. Don't go yet. The party's barely started. I looked back at him with a sad smile. For me, it ended a long time ago. Happy birthday, Dad. With that, I walked away. Not toward the service entrance this time, but straight through the main doors of the ballroom, past the curious stares and whispers, my head held high. The drive home from Oakmont Country Club felt surreal. Streetlights blurred as tears finally came, releasing years of pent-up hurt and disappointment. I pulled over twice, unable to see through the emotions that had been building since I'd been directed to that service entrance. By the time I reached my apartment, exhaustion had replaced the adrenaline that had carried me through the confrontation. I kicked off my expensive heels, hung up the Armani dress that had witnessed my humiliation, and collapsed onto my couch, still wearing my slip. The contrast between the glamorous party and my silent apartment felt appropriate somehow. Two worlds that had never quite managed to connect. Sleep came fitfully, punctuated by dreams of walking through endless hallways, looking for doors that kept disappearing. When my phone rang the next morning, I answered without checking the caller ID, expecting it to be Tanya with some work emergency. "Jessica?" Dad's voice was hesitant, almost unrecognizable. I sat up, instantly awake. "Dad, I've been up all night thinking about what you said." His voice sounded rough, as if he too had been crying. "You were right, about all of it." The simple admission caught me off guard. I had expected defensiveness, explanations, maybe even Caroline-influenced justifications. Not this straightforward acknowledgement. "I let myself become someone else," he continued when I didn't immediately respond. "Someone who cared more about appearances than substance. Someone who forgot what really matters." I closed my eyes, feeling the weight of his words. "It's been a long time, Dad." "I know. Too long." There was a pause, then, "I'd like to see you. Not at the award ceremony, though I still want to attend that. But sooner. Maybe you could show me your company, if you're willing." The request was so unexpected, so perfectly aligned with what I had wanted for years, that I almost laughed. "Yes," I said after a moment. "I'd like that." We arranged for him to visit my office the following week. After hanging up, I sat staring at the phone, wondering if anything would actually change, or if this was just momentary guilt that would dissipate once Caroline regained her influence. The week passed in a blur of meetings and preparations for Diane Fletcher's investment. When Wednesday arrived, I found myself unusually nervous, changing my outfit twice before settling on my standard work attire: tailored pants, a simple blouse, and low heels. Professional, but not trying too hard. Dad arrived exactly on time, looking slightly out of place in the modern lobby of our downtown office building. He had come alone, which surprised and pleased me. His suit was expensive but subdued, and he carried a small potted plant rather than cut flowers. "Your mother always said offices need living things," he explained awkwardly, handing me the fern. "To balance all the electronics." The reference to Mom, something he had avoided for years in Caroline's presence, felt significant. "She did say that," I agreed, accepting the plant. "Come on up. The team is excited to meet you." As we rode the elevator to the 14th floor, Dad cleared his throat. "Before we get there, I want you to know something. I've moved out of Caroline's house." I turned to him in shock. "What?" He nodded, staring at the elevator numbers as they climbed. "After the party, after what you said, we had a long conversation. Several, actually. I realized I didn't recognize myself anymore." He finally looked at me. "I'm staying at Jim's place for now, figuring things out." The elevator doors opened before I could respond, revealing the open-concept workspace of WinSchedule's headquarters. Glass-walled conference rooms lined one side, while developers and designers worked at clustered desks throughout the space. Digital displays showed real-time data from our servers worldwide. "Welcome to WinSchedule," I said, leading him into what had been my life's focus while he was absent from it. What followed was one of the most meaningful afternoons of my adult life. I introduced Dad to my team, showed him our products, explained our growth strategy. He asked insightful questions, showing genuine interest in understanding what I had built. Several times I caught him looking at me with an expression I hadn't seen since childhood. Pure, uncomplicated pride. During a coffee break in my office, he finally addressed the elephant in the room. "I failed you, Jessica. There's no excuse that makes it okay. I traced the rim of my mug, gathering my thoughts. Why did you let it happen? The distance between us, I mean. Dad sighed heavily. At first, it was seductive. Caroline's world, her confidence, the way she seemed to know exactly how everything should be. I was lost after your mother left, and Caroline offered a clear path forward. He looked out the window at the city skyline. Then, once I was in it, changing felt impossible. Each small compromise led to another, until I couldn't remember what I was compromising anymore. And now? I asked. Now I'm remembering who Robert Miller really is. He met my eyes directly. And I'm hoping it's not too late to be your dad. Again. The simple honesty broke something open inside me, not healing the hurt completely, but creating space for it to begin. I'd like that, I said quietly. But things can't go back to how they were. Too much has happened. I know. I'm not asking for that. I'm asking for a chance to build something new, something honest. We spent the next hour talking more openly than we had in over a decade. About his marriage to Caroline, my struggles, building the company, the parallel lives we'd been living. No miraculous reconciliation, no erasing of the past, but the beginning of a bridge across the chasm that had formed between us. As he was leaving, Dad paused at the door. I'm proud of you, Jessica. Not because you're successful or winning awards. I'm proud of the person you've become, someone strong enough to speak their truth even when it's difficult. 6 months later, I hosted a company celebration marking our expansion into the European market. The event was held at a local art gallery, owned by a friend. Nothing like the opulence of Oakmont, but beautiful in its authenticity. Dad came alone. No Caroline, no Brendan, no Madison. His divorce was proceeding amicably but firmly. He had moved into his own apartment and returned to electrical contracting, starting a small business focusing on sustainable energy solutions. We still had awkward moments, still navigated around tender spots in our relationship, but each interaction felt more genuine than the last. He made efforts I wouldn't have thought possible a year earlier, remembering details about my work, asking about my friends, showing up when he said he would. The Fletcher Innovation Award ceremony had been a turning point. Dad sat in the front row, applauding so enthusiastically when my name was called that several industry leaders turned to see who my enthusiastic supporter was. That's my daughter, I overheard him telling the person next to him, his voice carrying that unmistakable note of fatherly pride. The experience at Dad's birthday party had changed me too. I started a mentorship program for young women in tech. From disadvantaged backgrounds, remembering my own struggles and the lack of support I'd experienced. Each quarter, we awarded scholarships and internships, creating opportunities that went beyond technical skills to include confidence building and professional networking. More personally, I began forming my own chosen family, deepening friendships that had sometimes taken a back seat to work, reconnecting with cousins from my mother's side, creating holiday traditions that reflected my values rather than someone else's expectations. One evening, about a year after the country club incident, Dad and I met for dinner at a small Italian restaurant we both loved. Nothing fancy, just good food and conversation. As we finished our meal, he reached across the table and took my hand. "Thank you," he said simply. "For what?" "For not giving up on me. For being brave enough to tell me the truth that night. I was lost for a long time, Jess. You helped me find my way back." I squeezed his hand, thinking about the journey we'd both taken. "We're building something better now." He nodded, understanding all that remained unspoken between us. The hurt hadn't disappeared entirely. Some wounds leave permanent marks. But we had found a way forward based on honesty rather than pretense. True family, I've learned, isn't defined by grand gestures or perfect harmony. It's built in small moments of truth, in showing up consistently, in the courage to begin again after failure, Sometimes it means walking through the front door when others want to hide you away. Sometimes it means recognizing your own worth even when others don't. And sometimes it means finding the strength to offer second chances. Not because they're deserved, but because connection, real connection, is too precious to abandon without a fight. So if you've ever felt unseen by the people who should see you most clearly, know that your worth isn't determined by their recognition. Build your life with intention. Create your own definitions of success and family. And remember that sometimes, the most powerful thing you can do is simply stand in your truth, even when others aren't ready to hear it. Have you ever had to stand up for yourself with family? How did you handle it? Let me know in the comments below. And if this story resonated with you, please like and subscribe to hear more stories of overcoming family challenges. And remember, sometimes the family we choose is as important as the family we're born into. Thank you for listening to my story today.